When John Denver's song Take Me Home, Country Roads became popular, music lovers were exposed to one of his greatest works to date. The singer-songwriter-actor was also one of the best-selling artists of the 1970s and one of the most well-liked acoustic performers for the next 20 years. Denver was a role model celebrity in addition to being a well-liked voice. Outside of the camera, though, Denver's personal life was depicted in such a startling fashion that fans found it hard to believe this was the same artist they admired and loved. The terrible tales, which included ex-wife confessions and official accounts of Denver's illicit actions, were more accurate than his supporters had anticipated. The man's true character has finally come to light after years of conjecture, and it is startling beyond anyone's wildest expectations. Henry John Duckendorf was Denver's birth name. During the final day of December 1943, Denver had the kind of upbringing that many boys aspire to, growing up in a family that enjoyed aviation in Roswell, New Mexico. In a bomber known as the B-58 Hustler, his father, Captain Henry Duckendorf Sr., a famous Air Force pilot, established 3 speed records. In the military, the man was a hero, and he was even inducted into the Air Force Hall of Fame. The unpredictability of military life, however, was the drawback of this ideal life for young Denver. The family had to relocate frequently and quickly lived in Arizona, Alabama, and Texas. Unfortunately, Denver never stayed in one town long enough to form close friendships. It would be time to relocate again just as he was beginning to settle in. He felt isolated as a result, as like he didn't really belong anyplace. A sentiment he carried with him throughout his life. Denver received a unique present from his grandmother when he was 11 years old and lived in Tucson, Arizona, an antique Gibson guitar manufactured in 1910. Therefore, it was over 40 years old when it reached Denver's hands. This guitar came to represent his security, and he used it to create songs that helped him feel less alone when he was feeling down. Soon after, he advanced to singing with the Tucson, Arizona Boys Chorus, where he gained experience in public performance and harmony singing. He was already doing folk tunes at tiny shows by the time he was in high school. Music was evolving beyond a pastime. It was how he figured out where he fit into the ever-evolving world, which included his extremely rigid father. Denver was encouraged to excel at everything by his father, Dutch. However, Denver was a straightforward person who only desired to compose music. As a result, father-son relationships were frequently challenging. Nevertheless, flying remained their shared profound passion. Denver's ability to fly allowed them to finally appreciate each other's company. It drew them nearer. Maybe the activity's danger served as a reminder to them of how important living loved ones are. Much later in Denver's life, the same risk would prove to be tragic. Denver's sense of liberation from flying remained with him and frequently appeared in his songs. Denver attended Texas Tech University to study architecture after high school, but he soon came to the conclusion that he wasn't interested in building design. His goal was to become a musician. He thus dropped out of school and relocated to Los Angeles. He made the decision to alter his last name at that point. Denver was his choice. He chose the Colorado capital because he admired the state's rivers and mountains. It seemed like a new beginning. Denver was given a huge break in the middle of the 1960s. He was selected to be the lead singer of the Chad Mitchell Trio from a pool of over 200 singers that tried out. This was his first genuine opportunity in the music industry. He was able to perform in front of audiences around the nation as a result. He spent roughly 2 years with the group and put out 3 albums. His confidence as a singer increased as a result of performing on stage. Denver took in the hardships of life on the road and gradually started to discover his voice. Leaving on a Jet Plane is among his most well-known compositions from that era. It became a #1 success on the Billboard charts at the end of the 1960s after being recorded by the folk trio Peter, Paul, and Mary. That song demonstrated that Denver's writing could genuinely resonate with listeners, despite the fact that he was not yet a well-known solo musician. Denver didn't turn around after the 3 parted ways. On his own, he was already beginning to move up the charts. Denver made it sound as though it was easy to transition from a group singer to a solo star. When his breakthrough album, Poems, Prayers, and Promises, was released in the early 1970s, his career really took off. Although it nearly didn't, the song Take Me Home Country Roads ended up becoming a classic. For a moment, it appeared as though the song could fail due to sound issues with the first copies. However, Jerry Weintraub, his new manager, persisted. He persuaded radio stations to play the tune, beginning in Denver, Colorado. After its mid-April release, it gradually gained popularity. It peaked at number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 by the end of August. That following month, it went gold and sold over 1 million copies. The song continued to gain popularity over time, eventually selling over 1.5 million digital copies in the U.S. alone. West Virginia designated it one of their official state songs because of its powerful influence. In September 1972, Denver's follow-up album, Rocky Mountain High, was made available. It was his first album to make it into the U.S. Top 10 and his 6th overall. On the Billboard 200 list, it reached its highest position at number 4. Rocky Mountain High, the album's title tune, became one of his most popular songs and peaked at number 10 on the 1973 Billboard Hot 100. It peaked at number 29 on the year-end list that year and gained popularity among nature lovers. With the natural world. The song is even more relevant to Denver because the album cover was shot at Slaughterhouse Falls in Aspen, Colorado. Rocky Mountain High became one of Colorado's 2 official state songs decades later. Denver's most prosperous years were 1974 and 1975. 4 of his songs peaked at number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in a span of just 18 months. In March 1974, Sunshine on My Shoulders became the number 1 song. In July, Annie's song came next. I'm Sorry and Thank God I'm a Country Boy both peaked in May and September of 1975, respectively. His ability was showcased in these tunes. Some, like Sunshine on My Shoulders, were kind and optimistic. Others, such as Thank God I'm a Country Boy, were vivacious. As well as joy. He penned Annie's song for his bride in 10 minutes, and it ended up being a traditional wedding favorite. By this time, Denver was widely available on television, radio, and in millions of households nationwide. He also put out 3 albums during this heyday, all of which peaked at number 1. The 1973 release of Denver's Greatest Hits became the best-selling record in the history of RCA Records, even surpassing Elvis Presley in sales. In the U.S., his 1974 album Back Home Again achieved triple platinum status. He then published Windsong in 1975, which achieved double platinum status. These 3 albums collectively demonstrated Denver's status as a genuine music superstar. He had composed nearly 200 of the approximately 300 songs he produced by the conclusion of his career. He received 4 platinum albums and 12 gold albums overall. He was one of the most popular singer-songwriters of the 1970s, with over 33 million copies of his songs sold worldwide. Denver made a successful and unexpected foray into Hollywood. Even though Denver had never performed before, he co-starred with comic icon George Burns in the popular 1977 film Oh God. Audiences were won over by his honesty and friendliness. The narrative of a typical grocery store manager who was selected by God to deliver a heavenly message was told in the Carl Reiner-directed movie, which was based on an Avery Corman novel. People found it simple to relate to Denver's character because of the authenticity and plausibility of his acting. The film was a huge hit, grossing over $51 million in the US and even receiving a contender for an Oscar for its writing. Denver's debut role demonstrated that he was capable of more than just singing, even if he did not return for the film's sequels. He became one of the rare musicians who transitioned into acting with success. Even though some detractors didn't think he could, Denver managed to gain popularity outside of the US. Jerry Weintraub, his manager, thought it was critical for Denver to have direct communication with supporters abroad. Thus, Weintraub organized a number of television specials for British viewers in spite of some skepticism. He clarified that the critics would go directly to the people because they wouldn't make Denver a star. The plan was a great success. Denver gained admirers in Britain and contributed to the development of a devoted following throughout Europe with his kind demeanor and distinct singing voice. These specials demonstrated that musicians may be effectively introduced to the world through television, and contributed to Denver's rise to fame on a global scale. One of the greatest accolades in television, the Primetime Emmy Award, was even given to his special, An Evening with John Denver. He performed with friends, told stories, and sang his songs in numerous additional specials. His music was played in homes all over the nation and the world thanks to these performances. He was one of the most adored performers of his era because every performance seemed intimate. Denver, however, was not merely a vocalist. He addressed the U.S. Senate in the middle of the 1980s. Parents were requesting warning labels for music they thought was too offensive at the time. Denver defended free speech despite his reputation for soft-spoken ballads. Rocky Mountain High, one of his songs, was originally banned because it was mistakenly believed to be about narcotics. He defended the freedom to free speech and clarified the facts. He did not support warning labels, unlike what many people believed. The argument over free speech in music was altered by that incident, and its consequences may still be seen today. During the Cold War, Denver was the first American performer to play in the Soviet Union in almost 10 years. He performed in 11 cities, including Tallinn, Leningrad, and Moscow. There was more to his tour than just music. The goal was to bridge two cultural divides. His melodies and message of peace touched even those who did not understand English. He wrote a song called Let Us Begin, which advocated for peace rather than conflict, as a result of the trip. The album Live in the USSR featured recordings from that tour. Following the Chernobyl nuclear accident in the late 1980s, Denver rejoined the Soviet Union. It resulted in major health issues and the forced relocation of many individuals. He performed at a Moscow benefit performance that brought in a substantial sum of money. The recordings generated additional revenue. Politics was not the topic of that evening. It was about being kind and considerate. The crowd felt heard and visible. Denver demonstrated that a single guitar player might have a significant impact. Denver brought his music to China around the beginning of the 1990s. The Chinese were interested in him after he had been cut off from the outside world for years. Schools were already singing songs like Country Roads. He was invited to visit a number of cities by the government, and one of his performances was televised to almost 2 billion people. Some had desired to host the performance at historical locations such as the Temple of Heaven or the Forbidden City. He was warmly received by Chinese youngsters, and the nation's leader had taken notice years earlier. He became one of the most well-known Western performers in China at the time of his tour. Denver became increasingly concerned with assisting people later in life. He put out a best hits album titled Homegrown in the 1990s. All of the proceeds from that CD were used to support the homeless. He also contributed to the founding of the World Hunger Project at this time. He was given the Presidential World Without Hunger Award in recognition of his efforts. He was also involved in environmental matters, using his notoriety to advocate for the environment. In addition to establishing the WinStar Foundation, Denver initiated the Plant It 2000 initiative, which aimed to restore forests and plant trees. His personal life was filled with suffering, but his charitable activity grew to be just as significant to him as his music. His union with Annie Martel was a dream come true. Together, they adopted 2 children, and in just 10 minutes, Denver composed Annie's song for her. However, the issues in their relationship increased along with his notoriety. Annie frequently felt lost in his shadow and invisible. They made the decision to have a divorce in the early 1980s. What transpired was terrible and disorganized. Denver was typically kind in public, but in private he was quite different. He reportedly became enraged and erratic. The divorce was heartbreaking and bitter. Denver lost control one day after Annie felled some of his prized oak trees at their Aspen home. He arrived with a chainsaw and tore their furniture to pieces rather than arguing. He even cut their bed in half with a saw. It was a startling instance, a sinister representation of a failed marriage. Witnesses and friends found it hard to comprehend that Denver had filed for divorce yet being the same quiet singer they knew. His clean, wholesome reputation was tarnished by the abuse described in the court documents. Even several of Denver's past managers acknowledged that he had a terrible temper, and friends backed Annie's side. Despite Annie's silence following the divorce, Denver's reputation had already suffered. A lot of people who had before admired him started to view him very differently. In the middle of the 1980s, Denver met Australian actress and singer Cassandra Delaney at a Sydney hotel. She drew his attention right away when he was playing in the hotel bar. Their romance progressed swiftly. With close friends and family, they enjoyed a stunning mountain wedding by the late 1980s. Although it appeared to be a fairy tale, there were issues right away. Cassandra then stated that it was really difficult to be with a well-known man. She was significantly younger than Denver. His popularity followed them everywhere, and he was prone to mood swings. Although they appeared flawless to the outside world, tension existed behind closed doors. Jessie, their daughter, was born in the late 1980s. For years, Denver had thought that his childhood condition prevented him from becoming a parent. The birth of Jessie seemed miraculous. Some even questioned whether they had her with medical assistance. Denver became more domineering when Jessie was born. Cassandra sensed his growing aloofness and jealousy. Their brittle bond started to deteriorate. Cassandra was interviewed by an Australian magazine in the mid-1990s. Denver, according to her, had no real pals. Employees feared him. Secretaries frequently sobbed and resigned. He appeared kind to the outside world. However, according to Cassandra, this was merely an act. He was frequently irate and severe in private. She claimed that he tried to dominate her life, shouted at her, and drank excessively. She remained silent for a while in the hopes that he might change, but to no avail. Early in the 1990s, they split up, and a few years later, their divorce was finalized. It was a hard legal battle. Denver accused Cassandra of making him appear ridiculous and filed a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against her. Cassandra battled to maintain Jessie's custody. Denver's book later discussed this. He claimed that the divorce caused him great pain. He was never the same after that. He published his autobiography, Take Me Home, in the middle of the 1990s. Many fans were stunned. He discussed utilizing drugs including cocaine, LSD, and cannabis in his writing. He acknowledged cheating on both of his spouses as well. There had been numerous indiscretions during his first marriage to Annie Martel, the subject of the song Annie's Song. He admitted in his writing that he occasionally behaved more forcefully than was appropriate. One tale caught our attention. During a confrontation, he once cut a bed in half with a chainsaw. His impeccable image was shattered. Fans witnessed a hitherto unimagined aspect of him. In the 1970s, Denver was one of the most well-known singer-songwriters in America. With his gentle voice and acoustic style, he captured the hearts of millions of people and rose to the top of the music charts. His record label, RCA, helped him release 25 albums, 13 of which were gold and 8 of which were platinum. RCA's best-selling record ever was his greatest hits album. However, things began to shift by the mid-1980s. Drum machines and powerful synthesizers were becoming more popular in music. Denver's sound was no longer appropriate. Following its 1986 sale to General Electric, RCA made the decision to cut costs and concentrate on up-and-coming performers. They let him go despite Denver's lengthy and fruitful relationship with them. He was taken aback. He had recently completed One World, which he assumed would be his second album with them, and he felt that a contract renewal was assured. RCA decided to move on instead, believing that other artists could pay them more. Denver claimed that despite all of the money he had generated for them over the years, they had taken him for granted. He had to release his subsequent albums under his own label, Windstar, since no other label was prepared to sign him. It was a difficult lesson. When commercial objectives and music trends shift, even well-known artists can fall behind. Denver flew more than 20,000 hours over the years. He obtained licenses to operate gliders, single-engine, multi-engine, and even lighter-than-air aircraft. However, his personal issues started to catch up with him in the 1990s. Denver was taken into custody for driving under the influence twice. The Federal Aviation Administration intervened by requiring pilots to possess a current medical certificate attesting to their suitability for flight. They declined to renew his medical certificate following his second arrest. His pilot's license was useless without the certificate. He would have needed to demonstrate that he no longer had a drinking problem in order to regain it, but he never did. His greatest pleasure had been flying, but now he was deprived of it as well. The way he complied with the FAA's directives only made matters worse. He either disregarded or returned unopened the certified letters they sent him requesting that he surrender his medical certificate. This produced a legal loophole. The FAA was unable to complete the process of revoking his license since he never accepted the letters. He could therefore still fly on paper, but not because he was truly capable of doing so. Only because his collaboration was essential to the system. In March 1997, that loophole was ultimately closed. Denver signed one of the certified letters from the FAA, which allowed them to ground him formally. Every flight he took after that was prohibited. He would have had to prove his sobriety and follow all the requirements he had disregarded for years in order to regain his flying certificate. Denver, however, decided against it. Nevertheless, he continued to fly in spite of everything. He brought out a small experimental aircraft that he had recently purchased on October 12, 1997. He was rehearsing landings and takeoffs close to Monterey, California. He had only had the plane for a day, and before he flew it by himself, he had only spent roughly 30 minutes with an instructor. The aircraft was challenging to fly and had undergone significant modifications. The gasoline selector valve was one of the main issues. It was now behind the pilot's left shoulder, in a difficult-to-reach place. Denver had to stretch back uncomfortably and twist in his seat to transfer tanks. It was frequently necessary to use pliers to turn the stiff valve. Additionally, he couldn't clearly view the fuel gauges because they were behind him. To inspect them, he needed a handheld mirror, and even then, the results were unclear. He practiced takeoffs and landings that morning while flying close to Monterey Peninsula Airport, using up the fuel in the left tank. The engine sputtered and then went quiet, according to witnesses. Denver attempted to swap to the right tank as the fuel ran out. He had to turn the valve with pliers and reach behind him to accomplish it. He unintentionally hit the right rudder pedal while doing so. A few seconds after the plane's nose went sharply downward, it crashed into the Pacific Ocean. Denver died immediately. Denver had only around 3 gallons of fuel in one tank and 6 in the other when the flight began, according to National Transportation Safety Board investigators. They said that one of the main causes of the crash was his lack of knowledge with the aircraft. Additionally, they drew attention to the dangerous design modifications that made it practically difficult to exchange fuel tanks in midair. Denver was an experienced pilot, but he had not adequately trained to fly this aircraft. The crash could have been prevented, the investigation made apparent. The accident might not have occurred if Denver had refueled, increased training, or flown a jet with a safer fuel system. His last flight served as a somber reminder of how minor errors and disregarded cautions can have disastrous consequences. Denver's passing in the late 1990s served as a wake-up call in addition to being a heartbreaking incident. Millions of fans lamented the passing of a well-liked folk artist, but the accident also exposed a more nuanced aspect of his private life. Denver's intense passion for flying occasionally veered into dangerous conduct. Even without the required medical clearance, he was known to fly and do glider tricks with the engine off. These behaviors demonstrated a tendency to push boundaries, occasionally in risky ways. He continued to fly despite repeated warnings from aviation authorities and the revocation of his medical certificate. The crash also revealed other bad decisions. Flying alone without a flight plan, using a plane with known design flaws, and utilizing minimal fuel. These choices weren't made at random. They were a component of a wider pattern of dangerous conduct that led to catastrophe. His reputation had already been harmed by his prior arrests for driving under the influence and a crash in the mid-1990s when he was intoxicated, even though no drugs or alcohol were discovered in his body following the collision. Denver's legacy has endured in spite of these shortcomings. His music's messages of peace, compassion for the environment, and intense emotion continue to move listeners everywhere. Folk and country music classics including Annie's Song, Take Me Home, Country Roads, and Rocky Mountain High are still cherished today. Long before it became a popular cause, he was also among the first well-known musicians to incorporate environmental conservation into a significant portion of his work. Ultimately, people prefer to remember John Denver for his strong ties to music and the natural world over his bad life decisions. Fans are aptly reminded of the greatness of the man who traversed those rural roads by his 15-foot bronze statue, which is on display at Red Rocks Amphitheater.